We're going to move on now to the next item, which is our update on Project Connect.
Good afternoon, Chair Kitchen, City Council members, Dave Couch, Project Connect Officer. I'm glad to be here to go ahead and give you really a two-part update. One is the history of what we've been through over the last couple of months, and the second to give you a preview as we start to go forward into the next step to be able to do the selection of the locally preferred alternative. The selection of the locally preferred alternative will be based on the long-term vision map that was approved in December. We're focusing right now and have started the environmental process on the orange line and on the blue line. We've had meetings. The start was the first public meeting over at the library, and we're moving forward now with meetings up and down each and every one of the corridors. So as we go forward, we're doing that. Also on the BRT light lines, we're looking at coming back to the Metro Board at the end of this month for award of a contract to go ahead and go through the environmental process with that. So that also is moving forward. We continue with the community engagement. We opened a new section on the Project Connect website that can give the data and the information on all of the public meetings, the questions that have been asked. So it can show, we started by zip code. It shows the areas now, and we're going to set it up so that you can then drill down within each one of the meetings to see exactly what the questions were for that specific area. So that's an update that's in progress, and that's where we've been over the last few months. As we go ahead and move forward, and this is our timeline, we're looking at the second step in the process now that we'll have all of the contracts awarded that are in that yellow area at the end of this month, with the exception of a couple of small ones. And we're in the LPA process. And the first step in that process is to go ahead and go through the conceptual analysis. And that's really what I want to go through today, is what the framework will be for that. It is the framework. It does not contain any results, obviously, because we're looking at what the approach is and how we utilize that approach as we go through each one of the meetings on each one of the lines again. To differentiate between the different lines, we've got the full environmental process, the EIS that we're required to go through for the orange and for the blue line. That's because of the effects and the impacts that potentially are there. Everything from a lake crossing to other pieces that we'll have to take into account to make sure that we're mitigating anything that comes up as a result of those. The pieces that go into the categorical exclusion, which really will be the ones that will be the BR light corridors, those are ones that assume that there is minimal impact. It basically is a sharing of the existing right-of-way. There may be some small sections at stops that we have a little bit of right-of-way to take care of, but it really is a series of minor things that is a much shorter process that you go through to be able to get a categorical exclusion. So those are really the two different buckets that we have, with the main high-capacity lines being the environmental impact statement, and then the smaller lines being the pieces that are the categorical exclusions. As we go through, it is a two-step process to be able to get to the locally preferred alternative. The first one is the conceptual step, which is the one that we're embarking on now. And what we look at is, in that part, it's a definition and a start of an evaluation process. As we go into step two, it is more detailed, where we're looking at specifics in specific areas, evaluating impacts, evaluating effects, which ultimately comes to the LPA selection very early next year. In terms of what we wind up with and how we're doing things on the orange line, we have gone ahead and divided that into different areas, because each one of those areas has a variation in what the right-of-way width is. So we'll be looking at in terms of commonality of right-of-way widths. It's based upon, at this point, general widths. And as we go forward and do this next piece, we'll look at what in each one of these specific areas would be at grade, what could be elevated, what might be cut and cover, what could be a tunnel. And I'll go through in the next few slides some cross-sections to demonstrate what each one of those involve. This is an example of a section of the orange line. It is segment 6, and this is the area that we have got that is down in the central section, Oltorf down to Stastny. That is an area that, as we start to look at it and look at what we have for available information on the right-of-way widths, that will be an area that, as we complete the evaluation, our expectation is that will be considered to be something that we can do at grade. There may be some minor trade-offs that we have to do, but the looks of that and the way that we've done so far, there would not be an issue with it being at grade and retaining 2 running lanes in each direction. That will be the process we'll go through for each one of those components. As we go through that process and look at what the variations are, what I'd like to do is just go through a series of cross-sections at this point. The first would give you existing conditions in what would be in the street network right now, where there are 2 lanes in each direction, and also at locations around different parts of the city, a left-hand turn lane with an area that has got sidewalks and then bike paths. That's the typical configuration that's there in many locations. As you start to look at one example of what the transit way could be, it would be center running, where what we would do is to go ahead and put that transit way down the center of the street, retain the 2 lanes in each direction along the sides, and then do reconfiguration to be able to support that. We'd be looking at what the widths are. We'd be looking at what the sidewalk, the bike configuration, to make sure that this would work. And if we have minimal pieces that we have to look at in terms of any compromises, we'd go ahead and do that. As we look to the next one, this would be in a very, very constrained area. It is an example of what an elevated section would be, where you could go ahead and put the transit way up on an elevated deck and then maintain the 2 lanes in each direction at the lower portion. By this being on an elevated deck with the spacing of the piers that would be required, it's easier to go ahead and retain locations where there could be a left-hand turn under the guideway. The other alternative is to do something called cut and cover. This is an excavation that goes down from the surface. It's very similar to what you would see in any of the high-rise buildings that are going on up around town right now, where it basically is steel and timber lagging to go ahead and excavate down. In that location, there really are 2 different alternatives of what could be done. This first pictorial leaves the transit on the surface with the vehicular traffic underground, and the next pictorial gives you just the opposite, where you would go ahead and have the transit underground and retain the surface for the vehicular traffic. In this case, with putting the transit underground, you're then taking into account things that are vertical circulation, elevators, escalators, emergency egress, things of that nature for anything once you put transit underground. But that's one of the options we'll be looking at when we're in a very, very tightly constrained area. The next piece is if you were to do a bored tunnel, tunnel boring machine, something that has been used in other places. The Waller Creek project, I understand, was a tunnel boring machine. And in this case, what you would wind up doing is 2 bores underground that would be parallel. This is only applicable really for transit. To be able to do anything that would get vehicular traffic at that location, it would be a very, very wide tunnel bore, which normally isn't done in that method. So the way that we're looking at it is if we do the tunnel bore, it would put transit in the underground location and maintain the street. So as I said, the first piece of this is to take a look at each one of those sections, to go through from a conceptual stage and do an evaluation of which one would be applicable for each one of those locations. The next step in the process, which starts in October and will be a workshop, would go ahead and look at more detail for each one of those. There may be certain areas, a certain portion of any one area that is a little bit narrower or wider than others. So we'll have to take into consideration what that may be, what the effects may be, and what may be things that we have to look at in terms of widths or lengths. It all leads up to a December LPA recommendation, followed by public involvement and meetings through the month of the remainder of December, January, and February, with looking at a joint work session at the beginning of March, and then ultimately to a Metro board action with a request for approval in March. As we go through that second step, we're looking at the pieces that are that greater level of detail, defining exactly which transit segments of which type will go where, what the mode selection will be. And then as you select what that mode selection is, depending upon whether you're doing something that is elevated or underground, the things that are different in terms of what the potential grade is, in other words, the length that it would take to be able to get above ground or underground, that varies depending upon whether you're using bus rapid transit or whether you're using light rail. Those are the things that will be taken into consideration as we go through step number 2. When we come to the end of it, and in consideration of where we are with the LPA going forward, these are the 6 different components that are taken into consideration. It's ridership, capital costs, and really total cost of operation and ownership if you look at combining capital costs and the long-term O&M. Stationary analysis, transportation network, and also what are the components that are there from an environmental perspective. Are there areas that have got historic significance? Are there areas that may have wetlands? What are those components and what has to be taken into account? Those are the pieces that get looked at in step number 2. And that balance, if you will, is what takes us through the deliberation to come back to an LPA that demonstrates what it is that is the potential for the design, the potential for the system, utilizing whatever trade-offs may be necessary as we go through that process. That concludes my presentation. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. We have about 10 more minutes for this item if people have questions. The first thing I wanted to ask is just to clarify. I think that what you were saying at the beginning in giving us the different pictures, and that was very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That those are the different kinds of scenarios that you're considering for each segment as part of the conceptual design.
Precisely.
In other words, there's no decisions made at this point, and depending on that particular segment and the right-of-way available, some of those scenarios might be available and some of them might not.
Precisely, and that's
Okay.
the reason for trying to show each one of them to
Okay.
get that understanding of what the differences are and what we've got for capabilities and options.
What the ranges are to consider. Okay. So, Councilman Ellis.
Yeah, I've got a couple, and if I need to take turns, that's fine. I want to make sure everyone gets a chance. You were talking about depending on which design might be selected, that you would factor in what grades are appropriate. Are any of these designs more conducive to higher speeds or lower speeds or light rail as we kind of try to draw
Well,
this out better?
When you start to look at things that are grade separations, whether it is above ground or whether it is below ground, it takes away some of the interferences that are there, whether that's traffic lane, whether it's traffic signals, pedestrians. So you can get a higher speed and more efficiency as you start to go with things that are underground or above grade. But as you go underground or as you go above grade, so goes the price. The cost for doing something that's elevated is greater than at grade. And the cost for underground is much more expensive than what it is to do elevated.
Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking, so I'm glad to see we're on the same wavelength. As far as the map of the orange line and the blue line, could you talk a little bit, first of all, about the downtown connection? It looks like there's kind of a little H where the blue line kind of ends up downtown and connects to the orange line, but it's not completely clear what that might look like. And similarly for what appears to be the Crestview location. So if people need to go from the blue to the orange, what would those two different
Councilmember, let me get
intersections look
back
like?
to this slide. I think that will be.
I think it's.
Which doesn't get you the right scale. What you wind up with is the orange line basically is that main trunk north line that would go from Tech Ridge all the way down to Slaughter. It basically is that main core of the system. The blue line is intended to be the connection from the airport over into downtown. So there's several options as you go there. One would be to go ahead and cross the lake and come up next to the downtown station on the commuter rail that we currently have. So that gives you one leg that comes across and would go up to ACC Highland. And then the cross piece to give you the H is the connection really between the downtown station and across to Republic Square or to the old post office location.
Okay.
It gives you that ability also for interoperability. When you get the infrastructure in for the transit way, it really, the vehicle doesn't know whether it's on a blue or an orange or what color it is. That's the reason for having interoperability between the orange and the blue line, the same vehicle, the same concept. So you would be able, for example, to come in on the blue line from the airport and go directly up to ACC Highland, or you could go ahead and go across to get to Republic Square. There's a lot of operational characteristics. If the ridership warrants it, you'd have the infrastructure in place that you could go from the airport across to Republic Square and then north to go ahead and get to Crestview. So
Okay.
it really gives you that flexibility to be able to operate in many, many different directions, but that's the reason why the H is in the center.
Okay. It makes a lot of sense for it to go into that downtown area. I was just curious if there was a benefit to having the red, the orange, and the blue all have at least one similar.
The
Stop
better
in
places
that part
that
of
you
town.
can get that cross connection between any of the lines, and that's the example that would be there at the downtown station. You would be able to have the blue line that would be the high capacity coming up and across. You would have the red line, the commuter line, that would be coming in also to the new downtown station by the convention center. And then ultimately the green line that would go up to the northeast. So you would have the juncture of three different lines, two modes at that location. There's also something that could be the potential for the gold line, something that would go from ACC Highland across the center of that H and up to Crestview. And each one of those are just operational characteristics. As they are on other transit systems around the world, it gives you flexibility with those interconnections to be able to get people to be able to transfer from one location to another. The intersections are very important. That's why we also, when we're doing the BRT light, are also focusing on where those intersecting lines are, so you've got the transfer points and the ability to go ahead and change from one line to another.
Okay, and I'm assuming the gold line is the yellowish one that goes into my district or near my district?
Now, the gold line would be one that would be in the center of a town. The one that goes into your district is the one that is the yellow line.
Okay, so gold and yellow are
That's the one that goes, and I understand there was, you had a town hall meeting last night that we also had a table at.
Yes, and thank you for coming.
We appreciate being
see
invited,
Colby out
and
here.
I understand there was about 50 people there last night. Those are the kind of opportunities we're looking for to go ahead and participate in those events or to set tabling up on the weekends at different locations. So anyone who has anything, please identify, and we're glad to have people there.
Yeah, I really appreciate y'all coming out, and just my shameless plug for my district. I also have an ACC property in my district, and I think if people could get from one ACC campus to another, that could be really beneficial for a lot of people. Thanks. I think I ran out of questions.
So I also have a lot of questions about the downtown piece, and some of this is just, it's the way that I've always seen it presented is a little counterintuitive. I don't see a lot of transit maps that have right angles on them. I think that's the part that is confusing at times. You don't have to. This is you and I've talked about this before. So I want to see a lot. I want to understand much better how that's going to work, and I think it would be valuable even to model. One version of this map has orange and blue, and then blue splits off and orange goes down. Another version has orange and blue from the south, and blue splits off and orange continues. There's different ways to draw the map to show something that looks more like a transit map, I think, to the community. that's maybe half a marketing conversation, but I also want to ensure, because there are sometimes I've seen reports in the public about different meanings of what that cross connection is, and not all of the things I've heard described include a seamless transit vehicle making that transition, that there are some that think it's going to be two separate lines and there's some autonomous vehicle that's going to drive you across. I'm not a fan of that as an option. I don't think that works. Nonetheless, I also have questions about the northern half of the blue line, and I get that it's still dotted, but I mostly just have a lot of questions about this. And ultimately what it comes down to for me is, I think it's pretty clear that it's going to be, to accomplish these goals, is going to require the city of Austin. And I'm not entirely clear who's making the decision on the thing the city of Austin is going to be paying for. Because it doesn't seem like the decision is being made by the council. It seems like it's being made by the Cap Metro board.
I can speak to that unless you want to speak to that. Or maybe the mayor would like to add to that. But it's a collaboration. So there's several steps to it, depending on each body's area of authority. So Cap Metro will have to vote on a LPA, but the city has to put bonds on the ballot. So Cap Metro cannot do that. So that necessarily means that we've got to be step by step. It will do no good for Cap Metro board to vote on an LPA that makes no sense to the city council in terms of putting something on the ballot. So it's actually a series of votes by both bodies.
Do we have any indication what that series of votes, what the timing of that is? Because my
Yes,
concern
we
is
do.
that Cap Metro does a ton of work,
Yeah.
and then it comes to us in a form that can't be unpacked, and it's an all or nothing, take it or leave it. And
Yeah.
I will not vote for it then.
Well, that's one of the reasons that we've set up a series of joint council and Cap Metro board meetings, is so that at different steps, key decision points along the way, that there's that conversation between the council and the Cap Metro.
I've been to all of those.
There's
so
more to
far,
come.
and I'm looking forward to the more to come.
Yes.
But I really hope that it's something that is voted on sooner than later in our building on a Thursday, because I mean, we're paying for it, so it's kind of our decision.
Well,
It's kind of a
it's
joint thing, because it's
it's
our
joint.
decision on the bond, but the federal government won't give us the money to leverage it. That has to go through the agency. So we're all joined at the hip on this. And what's clear probably is that, and I think it is clear, that if the city isn't on board, it doesn't move forward. And similarly, if the Cap Metro board isn't on board, it can't move forward. We're in that place. But to your point, I think it's real important that the council is not put in the position where it's expected to vote on something that somebody else has deliberated, that our council has not independently evaluated. And I think that's absolutely dead on. So we have, as I understand it, the Cap Metro staff, which is working with our staff, is going to make a recommendation is going to present evidence to the community on all of the decision tree issues. We have to make decisions about locations. We have to make decisions about mode. We have to make decisions about above ground, below ground, widening. They're going to just lay out all of the choices, all of the data that they have on that. So hopefully there's like a really robust conversation. We'll have that as a council. They'll have that as a board. We'll have some people that are in both places. And it's conceivable that we could also convene to have those together if it was a more efficient way to do that. That happens, I think, in like August, September. And then there's a recommendation then that then there's a couple months of community conversation, wrestling with those, and then the Cap Metro engineers will be making a recommendation to the community, I think, in December. And then the community is discussing it. We can be in the middle of that conversation as a council as well. And then it goes to the
Cap Metro
board in
in
January, February.
March or so, by March.
Yeah, the March would be the time frame to be before the Cap Metro Board.
My sense is that it's going to be coming to our council at about the same time that
Right.
it goes to the Cap Metro Board.
Right.
So they're running parallel and concurrent processes. They're not going to be out in front of us, and they're not getting information that we're not going to be getting. Because we recognize at the end of the day, either everybody's on board or it doesn't happen.
And we can have more conversations and lay out those exact dates, because I hear your concern, but the idea is for that not to happen. And because it's actually, at the end of the day, it's not really even the city and Cap Metro, it's the whole community. I mean, the final decision is the public voting. So we've all really got to be on the same page. So, that's the general timeline right now, what the mayor just laid out. And it's all intended to be handed.
But I think Jimmy's point is a good point.
Yeah.
On the timeline that we have, because we have like kind of the big blocks that move things forward, we should really go through that and say,
Yeah.
from each entity's eyes, at what point are they going to start receiving data, where are they going to
Yeah.
receive briefings, where are they going to be able to ask questions and how they get answered, so that everybody knows well up front.
Mhm.
We just haven't gotten to that level of detail.
And
So
I think
there's always
I
a
get nervous when there are public meetings and information sessions occurring, which you have to do in order to be queued up for the federal process. So I understand
Yeah.
why we're doing those things. But, I don't want us to befall the same fate as some other things that we have done as a city that got out way ahead of us in the community before the council really told the staffs what we were hoping to find. And I think we've course corrected on that on some other things. I don't want us to make that mistake with this.
Well, perhaps what we need to do at this point as a takeaway is to drill down and get more specific in terms of the specific data that will be available for council and the specific points of discussion. I mean, we need to do some more homework from the council side to say when and how we want to have those drill down kind of conversations. So I think we should do that, and we can then see, here's the council calendar, here's the Cap Metro calendar, and make sure.
And to be very clear, I think we are having conversations. We've done joint work sessions. We'll do more of those.
I mean, more specific than that.
We got to start taking votes. We've got to be clear as a council, as soon as we can get to as much clarity as we can get to, that we're on board with where this is headed, and not get to a place where we're all like, yeah, this is good information, and we're talking to it, and we get to the end, oh, but I don't like that part. Well, it's too late. Sorry, you should have said that in the beginning, but you weren't given an opportunity to actually vote on any of these things until the end.
I
That's
think the
kind of
really
what I mean.
specific request is when the information goes out to the community in September, before the engineers are coming back and making a recommendation to the Cap Metro and the board, we ought to have an opportunity. We need to build into the process an opportunity for the council to give feedback.
All right. Well, let's do that homework, and then we'll have the conversation about that. All right. We're a little bit over time, but I don't want to. Do you want to go ahead?
I'll be
Okay,
pretty
go.
quick. Thank you. When we do have the conversations, in the interest of time, I won't do it now, but if we can get some clarity of what we are imagining the bond covers, because we've seen a lot larger vision than just the orange and the blue line, and it's getting a little bit confusing over, what would be covered by that bond, and whether it's, just going to be the orange and blue line, or whether it's the full build out that was, talked about through the vision map, et cetera. I'd like some clarity on what's anticipated at this point with respect to that. The other thing that I was wondering is, particularly for the part that's going down Lamar and then changing at the Triangle and going down Guadalupe, there's a lot of state land that's in that area, and I would hate for us to have to go below ground or above ground simply because we didn't have the extra 3 feet that the state owns. And so I'm curious about the conversations that may be going on with the state in that regard, to think about how the state could contribute to helping us widen it in certain parts of that so that we could keep the cost lower. The second part of that is I'm concerned there's a new building that was permitted. Well, I don't know that the city got to do anything but do the building permits, but a state building that's between where Guadalupe splits off of Lamar going south, that may preclude some of that in that particular area So I want to know about that. And then third, I just want to point out that in the legislative session, we did get some opportunity to use the ledger with folks other than UT at the state. And we have a lot on the ledger because of what we were able to do for the state with respect to the state complex. And it seems like getting transit in Austin would be in the state's interest. And I'd like to see how we can explore that since there is so much state land up that Lamar and Guadalupe area.
Okay, so are you okay if we get that information
Yeah,
to you?
that's
Okay.
fine.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.